King Cerulean of Laguna, cursed into the form of a blue bird, returned to his kingdom, as he was no longer able to visit his beloved Princess Florine, locked in a tower of Alni Palace, due to hunters stationed nearby by the princess's stepmother, Queen Repiara, who had also ordered all the windows nailed shut. But then there was a change of fortunes in Alni, as Florine's father, King Hanier, died suddenly. But when Queen Repiara tried to announce herself as the new ruler of the kingdom, the people revolted and stormed the palace to free Florine, who was crowned soon after. Repiara and Princess Mina fled the palace. Now Florine travels in disguise, with a small number of guards, to Laguna, while Cerulean and his magician advisor head for the home of the fairy Susi to persuade her to end the Bird King's curse. As fate often has it, they arrived at Susi's clearing not long after Florine and her guards had passed by. Even if they had spotted the carriage from above, there was nothing about it that could have identified it as transporting the queen. Having landed, Idro returned himself to his human form, while Cerulean perched on the magician's shoulder. Before long, Susi's palace grew in size, and the lady of the palace herself came out to greet them.
Young Master Idro, it's been so long since you last visited. And what a delightful pet bird you've brought with you. Such fine plumage. Whatever being was responsible for its creation was a true artist, don't you agree?
There was a certain glint in the Bird King's eyes as she said this. With a wry smile, Idro replied, "My Lady Fairy, we have much to catch up on, do we not?"
Of course, replied the fairy. Do come in.
The fairy led them inside to a reception room, where they saw Repiara and Mina. Susi instructed a servant to fetch them some food, including some appropriate for Cerulean. While in his current form, he had for the most part avoided the dietary staples of the natural bluebird, insects and the like, eating instead dried fruits, berries, and, when in Laguna, suet. These were brought for him with some wine, heavily diluted with spring water, as well as traditional Alni biscuits, and undiluted wine for the others.
As you can see,
said the fairy,
the timing of your visit is most fortunate. You can propose to Princess Mina and end the curse whenever you like.
Both Repiara and Mina were feeling a little vulnerable, being in exile and having lost their royal status. There was a moment of silence as they looked over at the Bird King. This silence ended as Cerulean asked Susi if there was any way to break the curse without marrying Mina. In reply, knowing that Idro would likely see through any lies she might tell, she gave the truth. The spell that she had used on him was essentially a contract with a spirit, similar to an oath. As such, there was nothing that Susi could do to break it, even if she wanted to. But Idro said, "But the death of Mina would make the contract null, would it not?" In an instant, a look of horror appeared on the faces of the former queen and her daughter. But before anyone else could say anything, Cerulean interjected. "There are no circumstances in which I would stoop to that. I'd be transformed back into a man, yes, but no longer a king. I wasn't suggesting that we pursue that option, only establishing its possibility," said Idro.
You are indeed correct, young Idro, said Susi, and your words do you credit, young king. So the choice is clear, is it not? Marry Mina and end the curse, or risk your enemies taking your throne.
Silence descended upon the room again. Now, looking around the table, Idro noticed something odd, a sort of magical connection between Susi, Repiara, and Mina. It was especially strong between the mother and daughter, It was similar to the connection that he sensed between Cerulean and Mina. He said, "Lady Sucy, I must consult with my liege in private. Could you arrange a chamber for us?"
"Of course,"
replied Sucy, and she called for a servant and gave them instructions. After the servant had showed them to the chamber, which included an ornate birdcage for Cerulean, they left them, saying that they would return later to invite them to dinner, and then pointed to a cord hanging from the ceiling, and said that if they needed anything before then, to pull it. Idro used his magic to prevent any eavesdropping by Sucy, then spoke. "I believe our hostess was being honest about the curse. But there is the chance that we could contact the spirit directly ourselves, perhaps make it a better offer. There is probably an altar to it, somewhere in the palace." The Bird King nodded. Idro continued. "But I noticed something curious. I think there is another curse involving Repiara and Mina. Most likely the same spirit is facilitating the contract." Cerulean gave a chirp of understanding. "And I suppose Mina is the one with the curse, given her unfortunate nature?" Idro replied, "Yes, most likely." "Let's wait a little while and send for her. Find out if she knows about the curse," said Cerulean. "My thoughts exactly, my liege." And so, some time later, they pulled the cord, and before long the servant knocked on the door. They told him that they had made a decision, and asked the servant to tell Mina that they wished to speak with her. There was a long wait, and they thought that there couldn't be much more time remaining before they would be called to dinner. In fact, Mina, at the insistence of her mother, had been beautifying herself, or at least attempting to do so. But, as ever, as she appeared at the Lagoonan's door, the contrast between the splendour of her dress and jewellery and the ghastliness of her face and figure made Cerulean cringe. Though now, especially considering that she may be cursed, he felt so much pity for her that it almost strained his heart. "King Cerulean," said Mina, "you called for me?" "Yes, Princess. Please come in." Idro closed the door and recast the privacy spell. Then he explained what he had observed in the reception room. As soon as she saw that they hadn't called her there for a marriage proposal, Mina's mood quickly began to sour. Neither Idro nor Cerulean insinuated directly that her ugliness was caused by the curse, but she did at least tell them that she didn't know of any curse. Their conversation was cut short when the servant knocked on the door again, and the three of them followed the servant to the dining hall. Despite her surliness towards them, Idro's words had made Mina curious. When Repiara and Sucy inquired if things with Cerulean were now heading in the right direction, the princess looked over at Cerulean and Idro, then pointed at the Bird King and said with a snarl, "What do you think?" After that, conversation around the table was very sparse. Then, all retired to their chambers. Mina, who was sharing a room with Repiara, waited for her mother to sleep, then crept out. She had never been shown Sucy's altar, but she had a good idea of where it was likely to be. There was a room she had spotted in a past visit that Sucy, when asked about it, had simply said, "Stay out of that room, or misfortune will befall you." She told herself that if it was unlocked, she would enter. In fact, when she tried the handle at first, it appeared locked, but as she was turning to walk away, she heard a click. When she tried the door again, it opened, and she saw the altar. In her usually caustic way, she demanded that the spirit speak to her. Ignoring her tone, it did so in a mirthful voice.
"We finally speak, little fish."
With no patience for pleasantries, Mina continued. "Am I cursed? Tell me."
"Indeed you are,"
replied the spirit.
"for the sake of your mother."
"For the sake of her how?" asked Mina.
"She wears your beauty on her face, disfigured by fire years ago,
Mina flashed with anger. What are the terms of the contract? How can the curse be broken?
2 ways only, little fish. To be married to a man that loves you truly, or by the death of your mother.
Bitter tears formed around her eyes.
You lie. As the holder of the contract, you can change it.
It is not in my nature to lie or break oaths, little fish,
replied the spirit. Mina felt like she was about to burst into flames. She stormed from the altar room, heading for her and Repiara's chamber. When she reached the door, she could just about muster enough self-control to open it carefully. Then she went to stand over her sleeping mother. Without hesitating, she took a pillow and pressed it over Repiara's face. The former queen woke and began to struggle. But Mina, bolstered by her rage, subdued her until finally her mother's body went limp. In an instant, Mina's appearance shifted to be like her mother's, but younger and somehow purer. And with this, all the fury and bitterness left her, and she stood in shock. Her hands shaking, she lifted the pillow and saw her face horribly marred by burns. But, seeing this, Mina felt a terrible guilt and pity, and lay down beside her mother's body and embraced it, weeping and asking for forgiveness.